Finally, I'd like to introduce our keynote, Sarah Llyod. Sarah Llyod farms with her husband, Nels Nelson. Is that his real name? Nels? That's a Norwegian. Oofda. So she farms with her husband, Nels Nelson, and his family on the 400-cow Nelson family dairy farm outside of Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin. Sarah works off-farm as the Special Projects Coordinator for the Wisconsin Farmers Union, and in this position she helps organize the Midwest CSA Conference and also WFU's solar initiatives. In addition, she's the Director of Development of the Wisconsin Food Hub Cooperative, a farmer-led co-op owned by the farmers and the Wisconsin Farmers Union. Sarah is the Secretary of the co-op board and helped facilitate the incorporation and 2013 business launch of the co-op. Sarah has a PhD in rural sociology from the UW-Madison and a master's in rural development from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. Her research has examined framings of sustainability in rural community, including analysis of the political economic structures impacting opportunities for positive change. Sarah represents the dairy farmers of Wisconsin on the National Dairy Board and served 6 years in an elected position on the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board. So, the got milk stuff, is that part of it? Long story. Sarah Llyod is also on the board of the Reesburg-based Worm Farm Institute, an organization that works at the intersection of culture and agriculture, featured in the annual Fermentation Fest and Farm Art Detour. She has recently been named to the board of the Blue Jean Nation, an initiative spearheaded by Mike McCabe to reinvigorate democratic institutions and to get organized citizens back in the driver's seat of our government. Please join me in welcoming our morning keynote, Sarah Llyod. And this is a gift for you.
Really nice.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, we're getting organized here. Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. Good morning. And as they say in the old country, glad midsummer. So it's the solstice. So no better time to come together and celebrate and have good energy. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to talk to you today, and I entitled my speech Pitchforks and Solar Panels. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we need for good mobilization, especially in the rural areas, but in general. As I was introduced, I am farming with my husband, Nels Nelson, and that is his real name. And he's a good Norwegian dairy farmer. I always joke that he's the last Norwegian dairy farmer, but Olaf Kristofferson lives around the corner, and he's still single, so, and I'm not making that up. That's actually happening in Columbia County, Wisconsin right now. But we milk 400 cows. We're 3 families on the farm. We ship our milk to Foremost Farms, which is a cooperative based out of Baraboo. And we have 1,000 acres of land that we operate, and we can grow all the food for all our cows on that land. And then I work for the Farmers Union, and really the core ideas of Farmers Union are education, cooperation, and legislation or citizen involvement. So we're going to talk a little bit about all those things today. And the one thing to think about with Wisconsin Farmers Union is we're part of the National Farmers Union, which works on global and national issues at the federal level. So we're able to engage at the federal, state, and then at the local levels. I'm the president of the Columbia County Farmers Union, so a lot of the counties have their own local organizations. So if you are from Wisconsin, or most states have a farmers union, we definitely invite you to join. And we need both farmers and eaters to be in the Farmers Union together. So please definitely join us. And I think what I'm going to talk about first is my pitchfork idea. So just a second, I have a prop. Okay. Hi, I have a pitchfork. So just to wake you up and make you nervous, I have this pointy pitchfork. And let's think about, we're all interested here in renewable energy, solar, wind, different innovative ideas. And we certainly know that it can get kind of dreary sometimes working on these issues because it seems like the cards are stacked against us, or there's a lot of power and effort going in the opposite direction. And so what do you do when things are pretty bleak? You get mad, you get disillusioned, you have a grievance. So you have these three pokey parts of the pitchfork, and then you can chase people out of town with your anger. Yeah. And I went and tried to find some good video clips of angry mobs with pitchforks. I was really thinking that Young Frankenstein, that Mel Brooks movie, that those angry mob, they only had torches though, so didn't quite work. But imagine the angry mob with the pitchforks. But I'm going to propose to us that just sort of reacting out of anger and disillusionment and grievance is not actually going to get us very far. So we're going to first talk a little bit about some of the good things that are going on that can energize us, and then I'm going to propose an alternate pitchfork model for our mobilization. So I'm going to set this down so I don't poke myself. So let's talk about some positive things that are going on right now in the area. One thing is that there's lots of interest in renewable energy, especially solar right now. As an example, the Wisconsin Farmers Union held a workshop in January up in Eau Claire. And we thought, well, if we get about 40 people to come to learn about what opportunities there are in solar, that'll be a good turnout for a half-day workshop. And we had 150 people show up in Eau Claire. So people are out there. They're very interested in figuring out what they can do. And one thing that's really encouraging that I know some about in the western part of Wisconsin is that the electric cooperatives are really taking a lead on doing some larger scale solar projects. So how many people are members of a rural electric cooperative? Okay, shout out for the rural electric cooperative. So for example, Vernon Electric Cooperative has a 1,000-panel array that they put up, like a big community garden. It's 305 kilowatts. And members of the co-op paid up front for the panels. So they each paid $600, and then they get a monthly rebate on their electric bill. And it can range from about $1 to a little over $4.50. And they sold those out really quickly. They actually had to put people on waiting lists. There were so many people that wanted to be part of this group action. So that's really encouraging. And Vernon Electric also hosts a larger array, a 517 kilowatt array that Dairyland Power has up. Eau Claire Energy Cooperative is planning and implementing a similar, an 858 kilowatt array. And a lot of the other western Wisconsin electric co-ops are doing the same thing. So that's something to be excited about. And the big news is that Dairyland Power has just put out a request for someone to put 25 megawatts up of solar in the 4-state region that they operate. So let's give a hand to Dairyland for a big move. We also have bigger news, like Norway is divesting, their pension fund is divesting $890 billion of all coal investments. Now, of course, Norway has huge oil reserves, so I guess they're kind of in a position to be able to step away from coal, but we still, that's good effort. And hey, what about the Pope? That Pope guy. Yeah, so the Pope is talking about ecological sin, things like that. Where's my pitchfork? So, you know, but it's important. Obviously, huge institutions of our culture globally are starting to get it and starting to use their power to do things. So those are kind of the bright spots, so we should feel excited about those. But what does it really look like, especially in the upper Midwest context, for us to continue the good energy and really push forward with it? We really want, and this is Wisconsin Farmers Union's position, that we want more distributed production system for electricity. We want to move away from really large scale, certainly fossil fuel based generation. But we really need our citizens to be engaged. And I know that the reason you are here is because you are one of those really engaged citizens. So I don't really need to tell you about that important thing. But what I'm going to ask you to do is think when you're talking to your neighbors and people that you meet when you're not on the energy fairgrounds, to think about maybe some of the key ideas that they might consider to situate ourselves in today. So raise your hand if you know if your electricity into your home, okay, those of you that are off grid that are super cool, you have to sit out on this question, but we'll get to you later. Raise your hand if you know if you get your electricity from a co-op, a municipal-owned system, or an investor-owned. Like, do you know what the ownership structure is of your electric generation? Okay, pretty good. So the thing that I think about is when I start talking to people that maybe don't know that much about renewable energy is sometimes understanding how they themselves are interacting with these systems is perhaps the first thing that we need to talk about. Because if I get my electricity from a cooperative, then I obviously have some more ability to interact with that system because cooperatives are based on members and set voting systems and there's a board. And so you actually have a way that you can enter into the conversation. What do I do if I get my electricity from an investor-owned utility? It's harder, and we're going to talk a little bit about what some things are that we can do. Okay, we're going to talk about the pitchfork idea a little later with the investor-owned utilities. And so we have to figure out a system, though, so I'm going to talk about those structures, but we really need to think of a system where we can get the broadest benefit for the broadest people in a distributed system. So let's think about how we might mobilize around this. How do all the great mobilizations of history happen? Do they happen spontaneously? Spontaneous revolution. No. So did you listen like during the Arab Spring in Egypt and places they'd talk about like CNN be like spontaneous revolution? We have no idea like how that happened. Well, guess what? Revolutions don't happen spontaneously. There are some certain things that we need to be able to get there. I also was reading about the civil rights movement over the last year, and you know, people always like to think of this romantic idea that Rosa Parks was an individual woman and she was tired and she just didn't feel like moving on the bus. But Rosa Parks was a trained activist, and you know, and that's really important. You know, she had been at the Highlander School, she was part of a larger group of people, and they planned this, and she was not the only person that didn't move from her seat on the bus. And yes, we honor her individual action for sure, but this is the important thing. Like, we are all in this together and we need to think about it strategically. So now comes my next supersonic prop. Hold on. Here is the better pitchfork for our action. Now, hats off to Val and Rick Adamski, because Val, this is actually a hay fork, and I know that because it's not really a pitchfork, but you could use it to pitch some stuff out and maybe some stuff in. So we'll just pretend that, you know, the 3-tine and the 10-tine have the same exact function, which I think they kind of do. Okay, so what do we need for a good mobilization? We need to plan, we need to strategize, and we do actually kind of, part of that strategy is timing. So sometimes we might need to be patient about certain things that we're going to do. And back to that question I asked of, like, do you know where you get your electric power, and do most of the people in your neighborhood understand if it's a co-op or investor-owned? We need to understand the sub-politics. Who are these people that are making these decisions at these different entities? And let's work strategically and not just wave our 3-tine anger pitchfork, because that may not be so strategic all the time. We need resources. We need money, time, energy. We need the MREA to put up all these tents so that we can come together. We need all these venues for interaction and communication. We need our internet listservs and websites and all those things. And we need networks of people, both formal networks and informal. So here comes your next interactive assignment. Look around the room. Raise your hand if you see someone in the room that you know from a different place, like that you didn't just meet here. Do you see anybody? Raise your hand. See people? Excellent. So this is very critical. You can't, having interaction with other networks gives you more power. So I was reading about the Paris Commune uprising of 1871. And those French people are always having a revolution. And sometimes they're more successful than others. But guess what was critical to the Paris Commune uprising of 1871 is that they had interweaving networks that were both connected through, like, the Paris Guard and through the neighborhood associations. So it was a geographically based network. Their people knew each other because they actually lived by each other. But then they also had this sort of overarching network that could tap into those actual geographic networks. So it's important when we're strategizing about our mobilization that we think about these things. Okay, so let's go back to what we're going to get by waving this more complicated fork around. And what we want to get to is economic democracy. And that's really the goal. So that's the vision that I want to put out for us. And economic democracy is about the most people having the most access. And this is something that is a challenge in all of the work that we do, but I think the renewables has a special challenge, and it's our time to really pay attention to it. Because as we know right now, there's a great opportunity, for example, for solar right now. There's a lot of people that are able to do individual solar. There's some, for farmers, there's some USDA money available that can support support the installation of solar through the REAP program. There's a focus on energy in Wisconsin, an incentive. For those of you in Minnesota, there's a lot of stuff going on that the Minnesota government is figuring out to try to get these larger systems put up. So we have all these things. There's a tax credit right now. And I think this is kind of critical. We all look at these tax credits from the federal government as something that's a benefit. It's an incentive to put up solar. But the problem is think about how a tax credit works. You actually have to have made income to be able to take advantage of that. So it assumes that you have this way of making income and having profit. And I don't think that's accessible for a lot of people and a lot of businesses. I know as a dairy farmer, most years that's not something that I'm going to be able to do because I'm not making any money, and that's a whole nother story. But I think that we can do a lot better, and I know that there's a lot of great work being done here, and that's why a lot of us are coming together here, because we need to figure this out together. I was interested to hear about the real RREAL work that goes on, the Rural Renewable Energy Alliance, where they're really working with lower income people. Yeah. Yay! And I think this is really critical for the movement because we have gotten certain policy things put in place that we need, and we have the technology and the infrastructure lined up, but now we have a risk that as we move away further from the fossil fuel base, that we're going to have a really unequal movement. So that's why I'm really excited to talk to all of you about this. Can we take a lesson from a lot of work that's going on in the local food movement of really trying to link all the people in the supply chain so that we actually know where the technology was manufactured, we know the distributors, we know the installers, and we obviously know the people and the businesses that are benefiting, and we are actually involved in the systems that provide the grid, and we know all these people, and we're keeping as much of the benefit close to home. So the local food movement is really trying to do that with transparency and having a picture of your farmer at your grocery store, or when you meet your farmer at the farmer's market. How can we do that with some of the technology that's being built and installed around renewables? And I think we can take a lesson from local food. My family, the Llyod family, is from northeastern Columbia County, which is east of Portage, west of Beaver Dam in Wisconsin. And there's a 90-turbine wind field that was put up several years ago. And if I don't live in that town where those 90 turbines are, and I don't own the land where a particular turbine is sited, I actually get no financial benefit from that wind turbine. I can see 28 wind turbines from the living room of our ancestral farmhouse, and yet I'm 10 feet over the town line, and so I don't get any benefit. And I'm not saying that means no one, don't do it, but we can do a lot better than this. Are we going to let these large financial firms come and put up these multi-million-dollar installations and just sort of extract all the value out of that? I don't want that, and I think we can be much more creative, but we are going to have to organize with our multi-tined fork in order to make that happen, because I think there is a lot of money that's going to come in to try to fund these larger projects. This Dairyland Power 25 megawatt, is there a way for us to all come together and figure out if we can keep as much of that close to home? I would like to try that. I would be interested in talking with people about that. We need to, bring our banker friends and our finance friends close into us, because that's something that we obviously don't always have our finger on, but there's lots of financing out there right now, and we need to figure out how to build the movement to bring them closer to us. So that would be a key thing for me. And we really need a broad coalition. So the fact that you looked around the room and you could see people from other networks that you knew, that's really important. Before I saw the light and came to Wisconsin and worked on agriculture issues, I used to work on forestry issues in the boreal forest up in above the Arctic Circle in Sweden and Finland and Russia. And I was amazed by the broad coalition that came together to work on those issues. We had Earth First and Greenpeace that were locking themselves down on buncher fellers, but we also had the World Wildlife Fund that was wearing suits and ties and going into ministerial meetings with the European Union. And despite the fact that there were very heated meetings about tactics and strategy, we realized that we needed the broad coalition to be able to work on all the different fronts. And so I would encourage us all to kind of keep together and recognize the strategy of working across a broad front. And so I will end up by encouraging us all to keep talking, use this time together when we're actually in the same physical space, and then take these meetings that we have today and tomorrow away and keep it up with telephone calls and emails and strategy. I know there was a group strategizing last night about how to make a broader coalition, so please be involved in that. And thank you very much for your time and putting up with my pitchforks.